Welcome, everyone. I am Adeshewa Josh, and this is Africa Matters. The Horn of Africa is facing its worst drought in more than 4 decades. Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, and Eritrea have each experienced 3 failed rainy seasons in a row. The UN says the situation is putting nearly 13 million people, half of them children, at risk of extreme hunger and starvation. Farmers and herders in the region have seen their crops fail and livestock wiped out. Last year, nearly 1.5 million farm animals died of malnutrition in Kenya and about 240,000 in southern Ethiopia. Cereal production in Somalia is expected to drop by more than half due to low rainfall, as hundreds of people flee their rural homes to nearby cities in search of food and pasture.
After the devastating drought, with crops dying off and livestock lost, those with goats that have been wiped out face financial trouble and hunger, except for the few who can sell 1 or 2 camels at lower prices. People are surviving on small donations from organisations and support from relatives abroad, while others are stuck in a tough situation.
Historically, any drought response in Africa has been reactive, with governments and aid agencies dispatching humanitarian assistance as the crisis unfolds. But scientists say this approach won't fix the problem in the long term, and that a proactive approach is needed, since drought is expected to be a recurring event in the Horn of Africa for decades to come. Dr. Richard Munanga joins me now from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for making our time. We are seeing pictures of severely malnourished children in Somalia, worsening drought conditions in Ethiopia and Kenya again. How do we break the cycle of persistent droughts in the region?
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I mean, let's put things in perspective. The reality is that between 2020 and now, this is the 3rd drought that is actually affecting the region. And as we're speaking today, we have over 13 million citizens that have been affected, plunged into suffering, walking long distances in search of water, and also plunged into food insecurity. And because this is happening at a time in which the region and the entire world, and of course the African continent, is just recovering from COVID-19, this is only going to get worse. And with a changing climate, with every report showing that at least we are going to reach 1.5 degrees in about 20 years from today. And Africa is already warming faster than the entire globe. These droughts are only going to get worse.
Right. So water experts have suggested that tapping into groundwater, which is found in abundance in Africa, can help resolve drought in Africa. How can this and other scientific solutions like cloud seeding help Africa become more resilient to drought and food crisis?
Yeah, that's a very important question, but the reality is this. Scientific solutions are one dimension, but we cannot forget what is making the communities more resilient, more vulnerable to these emerging droughts that are going to become the norm. We cannot use knee-jerk reactions just to prescribe solutions to communities. Of course, there are a lot of scientific solutions that do exist, but this is the point that we need to take into consideration. We need to build on what communities are already using to cope. And to do that, we need to focus on one aspect, socioeconomics, because the reality is that while people are more vulnerable to extremities like droughts or floods, and in this case droughts, is because of low levels of socioeconomic opportunities. And if they can be empowered socioeconomically, they can be able to afford the alternatives. They can be able to afford water. They can be able to put food on the table, more money in their pockets. And the scientific solutions like ensuring that at least water boreholes can actually be dug. And also rainwater harvesting can actually be put in place to become the norm and not the exception.
Whose responsibility should that be? The government, the aid agencies, or the people themselves? Shouldn't that be all right, go for it.
Everybody's responsibility. We need a public-private partnership where citizenry play their role, the government play their role. Let me just give a very practical example here. Communities, as we're speaking today, 1.5 million animals are dead just in February 2022 in the Horn of Africa. Each animal goes for $200. If you multiply that, you will see that we're talking about 300 million US dollars have been lost. What am I trying to say? The point is, if simple solar dryers that are decentralized to communities can actually dry this meat, the animals can be slaughtered before they die off. But to do that, these are capital intensive solutions that government can actually be able to help support the community to have a communal solar dryer. But you need the citizens to embrace it and to be able to maintain it. So without working with the citizens and closing the gaps and making sure that they become the owners of the solutions that they need, even if government intervene in using a knee-jerk approach, it will only help solve the problem in the immediate, but in the long term, we will be coming back to the same issue.
All right, so what can an African do now at an individual level?
First of all, what an individual can do, you and your team are already doing it, communicating solutions, journalists communicating solutions that each and everyone can be able to pick up, supporting communities, mothers and children in communities with water, with food, but at the same time also creating awareness of what can be more sustainable, not only in the immediate, ensuring that communal cooperatives in these areas that have been affected today, people are coming together and engaging through structures that can actually be accountable and traceable, so that at least if they are to sell their food, they can have a bargaining power if they use a communal cooperative. If they are to be able to get a water tank to harvest water so that when there are droughts, they can then be able to fetch water, they can do so by leveraging the cooperative spirit, so that at least they can contribute little money together and be able to have that force and that power to be able to purchase so. But more importantly, what is really needed is that we need to leverage on local governance structures, because what cannot be measured cannot be done.
Before I let you go, one of the things we're hearing from aid agencies is that they've not been able to raise enough funding for this crisis, because other humanitarian crises have overshadowed the ongoing drought in the Horn of Africa. So what can be done to change this?
The reality is that we are under a changing climate. Climate change is with us today. That is an emergency. We saw COVID-19 that came, that's an emergency. With a changing climate, we're going to have many emergencies: droughts, floods, hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones. What this means is that we might not be able to always have money to address this, but we can be able to build the resilience of communities by using the little that we have to build on what can be able to sustain them and ensure that they become socio-economically empowered. Because using money to help communities to become socio-economically empowered, put money in their pockets, food on the table, means that they can then be able to actually overcome this adversity. Let me just give a very practical example. In 2020, Louisiana in the United States faced hurricane, and actually people in this state were able to access insurance worth 10 billion. The Horn of Africa, when locust strike costing food $8 billion US, there was no insurance. The point I am making is that when people are socio-economically empowered, they can be able not only to survive through these extreme events or emergencies, they can then be able to cope, and that will mean that at least they take destiny into their hands by putting food on the table, having the requisite requirements that are needed to be able to withstand these adversities that are going to continue to become the norm.
And as
without ensuring socio-economic empowerment, we might not be able to actually overcome these adverse events that will become the norm.
And as you mentioned earlier, the African governments of these regions have a critical role to play. The people themselves have a role to play. And of course, the aid agencies supporting them. Dr. Richard Manang, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.